I'd already finished my first year of college at University of Nebraska. And the year after that, I stayed a lot of it with Aunt Mamie over here on the far right on the top. Because they didn't have any children either, but they were all very good to me. And
So you went and stayed with Aunt Mamie, and where was she?
she was in near Colon, Nebraska, Colon.
And Mamie is the one there.
Another little tiny town, about 300 people, I think. There are lots of little towns in Nebraska at that time.
And which one is Mamie?
She's the one on the top on the far right.
Okay.
Right behind my mother.
Right next to, yeah. Okay. And so you went and stayed with her for how long?
Well, I was working at that time. I had a job in Lincoln, and I would come home weekends and spend them with her and Uncle Elmer.
What kind of job was it?
Oh, I think I was working at a dime store because I was doing some work in a hat shop or something, just odd jobs just to keep me in business till school started again.
So.
And then I went into a business school because I had.
So you'd already graduated high school?
Hmm?
Did you was this after you graduated high school?
Oh yeah. I was 18, I think. I graduated when I was 17, yeah. And 18, I was at Nebraska U. And the next year, I don't think I did much of anything except goof around. And then the next year after that is when I went to, I took a civil service examination. And I passed. I was supposed to go to St. Elizabeth's Psychiatric Hospital in Washington, D.C. for my nurse's training. And I was quite excited about it.
What year was this?
Oh, that must have been about 1941, 42.
Had the war already started?
Hmm?
Had the war started?
Not yet. Well, I have a hard time since I didn't have any relatives at all that went to the war. And it didn't seem that real to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I realized I knew a couple of boys who went in the Army, but none of my family, so it wasn't that intense as it was for a lot of people.
Do you remember where you were when Pearl Harbor happened?
Oh, yes. I was working at the city library in Lincoln, Nebraska. And it came over the radio, and I had a couple of roommates. And I didn't really like either one of them very well, but that was just the way it worked. And the rent was cheap, so we stayed there.
So was this before you went to nurses?
Because I didn't have any brothers, and I couldn't know how they felt, and they would just sympathize with each other.
So was this before you went into nurses training?
Yeah, because then when I tried to go into Washington, D.C., my skin broke out all over, because I used to have a lot of problems with skin rashes.
Oh, so that's where I get it
the doctor
from.
wouldn't pass me, and I had to give that up. So then I went and worked for the Army Engineers, because they had built a bomb loading plant right outside of Meade, Nebraska.
Imagine that.
And my older sister's husband's family had owned a great big house there and had lived in the country for quite a while. In fact, they found a homestead thing from General Grant when they moved out of that house in their attic, and it was quite a big thing, but they had to give up their house because they were building this bomb loading plant, and they had to have the engineers living in that house, and I thought it was a lot of baloney, but anyway, it just seemed like such a shame for one of the most beautiful houses that was around for them to have to give it up.
So did they get it back after the war, or did the Army just buy it from them?
It was damaged. It was so damaged by the time the war was over. And I think that Mrs. Gustafson had Myrtle's last name. My older sister married Norman Gustafson. And he had 2 sisters. But the family had just kind of, she had died and the family just kind of gave up. I don't know where I don't remember when they died. I was probably in Dallas or California or someplace. I don't remember.
So did they die together or close to each other?
I don't even know that. They weren't very close to they lived on the other side of Meade from my folks. I mean, it was like you were south of Meade or you were north of Meade.
Oh, is that right?
So you weren't just good friends with everybody.
I want to go back to during the Depression era. Do you remember, for the lack of a better term, suffering deprivation from the Depression, or do you think your farm kind of kept you and your folks kind of isolated from the worst effects of?
Oh, I think it kept us isolated from the worst of it because we always had food. We didn't have to worry where our next meal was coming from because we had cows and pigs and sheep. And
did you own the farm outright, or did you have to, was there a bank loan on the farm?
I'm not sure who owned the farm at that place at that time. I know when the folks first started working it belonged to a missionary who had gone over to China or someplace and wasn't even in the United States. And I don't know what all. Dad kept all of his financial things, and anything to do with money is secret from us. He didn't want us to be talking about it to the neighbors, was his excuse. He and she knew what it was, and we didn't need to know because we were just kids. That was all there was to it. And I never learned anything about banking or saving money or any of that.
Do you know if anyone around you lost their farm? I mean, just lost it as opposed to selling? Or...
I think the only person I know who lost their farm was somebody who was a drunk.
Oh, right. So it wasn't
we did
necessarily...
have one drunk in the country, I think. Most of them were pretty religious, but
right.
This one family was the Brown family, and they were looked down upon badly. I don't know why. The kids were okay. Went to church with us and everything, but their daddy was a drunk. That was totally unacceptable. As far as Nebraska was concerned at that time, it was still prohibition. They never... They didn't acknowledge any of that. Let's go out and have a cocktail kind of thing.
Did your mom and dad ever talk? Do you ever remember conversations when prohibition was eliminated?
They didn't. They thought it was just a lot of nonsense. That was all. It was supposed to be
no more liquor.
No liquor. That was what. That was.
Do you think your dad? Did your dad agree with that?
Well, if he didn't, Mother made sure he kept quiet.
World War II. So you mentioned, when Pearl Harbor happened, you were in Lincoln, Nebraska. Is what you said?
I was in Lincoln.
Yeah.
Working for the library there.
Right. And then what happened?
I went to work for the Army Engineers, the bomb loading plant outside of Meade. And then I worked there for about 1.5 years, I guess. And then I went home for a break because they were closing the work on the plant. And then I got called to go to Bruning, Harvard, and Fairmount airfields. They're in, oh gosh, I can't even remember the town. York.
So is this like a contractor? for the
This
military?
was still the engineers. I was working
Right.
for the Army engineers, and they were,
So you were a civilian, so the Army engineers, were they actually in the Army at that time? Or
yeah, they were Army. Well, they were with the Army engineers, but they were civilians. They were
Right,
not officers or anything.
right. So was this the Army Corps of Engineers, or did they call it that yet? I
It
can't
was a Corps of
remember.
Engineers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I worked for them, I guess, there for about a year. And then we got transferred to Lincoln, Nebraska. And from there, I found out that's dying, that plant, that poor plant.
It might have been bacon, and it seemed like it was kind of hot there in that window.
Oh, it's supposed to have lots of sun. I guess it'll survive. At least till we get this done. And, where was I? Oh, yes, then I got word of the Cadet Nurse Corps opening up. So I had to try one more time. So I joined the Cadet Nurse Corps and went to Denver, Colorado, and I was in nurses training for a year and a half. Broke out the first week I was there, but they let me get by.
Because they probably needed nurses so much, because,
Well, they were pretty anxious to get nurses
yeah.
graduating. Anyway, I was halfway through nurses training when I went back home for my vacation, and I got rheumatic fever.
Ooh.
And so when I got back, I went to the hospital, went in the clinic, and they had one of the doctors check me out. They didn't know I had dated him a couple of times. It was most embarrassing because I remember he was kind of heavy set, and his name was Dr. Monahan, and he was a very interesting man and had a good sense of humor and everything. And I knew he had a girlfriend, but we had just dated whenever they would break up, occasionally. But that one time he came in the hospital, and his face, he was kind of freckled faced anyway, and the top of his head, his Beanie Lucy's hair, and his head turned almost purple with embarrassment. He said, "I'm going to have to listen to your heart somehow." It was so funny, I almost laughed because he was so embarrassed. It took all the embarrassment away from me
Because he was so embarrassed.
he was so terribly embarrassed. But anyway, I was just about to go back on the ward when my skin broke out again. And so the head nurse called me in, and she said, "Well, we can't keep you around here any longer. You're going to get blood poisoning." Because we were allowed to wear rubber gloves. Don't ask me why. That was one of the rules. No nurses could wear rubber gloves.
Wow. Now you can't touch anything without rubber gloves.
Yeah, now you can. Rules sometimes can just drive you out of your mind. But anyway, so I cried for about 3 days, and then I went to live with a friend of a cousin of Norm's, Myrtle's husband, Norm Gustafson. And they had a daughter my age. Her name was Nona. And she was a very good friend of mine. We got to be very good friends. And I went to work for an engineering firm again.
And this
I like
was,
working for
so were you in
engineers.
Denver still at this? Were you in Denver still? Where were you?
Yes, I
You
was
were
in Denver at that time. They lived there, had for some time. And then I hated to work for engineers. I didn't like office work in the first place. And then I found an ad in the paper for somebody who wanted somebody to take care of this woman who had just had her 5th child, and she needed somebody to babysit for the kids. She was going to have to take a leave of absence from her family and recuperate, because she just kept having kids.
And she was
They were
worn out.
Catholics. She's a very nice lady, and I liked her very much, and I liked the kids. But then I was just trapped in that house, you know, about 7 days a week. Full bar and slept there and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I just didn't have any social life at all, and I really got fed up with it after about a year.
I bet.
And then her husband, when she was gone, her husband wouldn't even let me go to my friend's house for Christmas dinner. I didn't get Christmas off, and that just did it for me. And I know Mrs. Claycomb was very angry at him for that. You know, because I got along well with the kids. The kids liked me, and I liked them. We were just...
Right. But you were a young woman. You had to have a social life of some kind.
Yeah, I was only about 23, 24, and so then about that time was when well, maybe I was younger than that. I don't know. I lose track of the years. But anyway, I would think that was when I became an airline hostess.
Hmm.
And I went down to Dallas. And I really had a hard time down there because I was with all those Southerners. And then my two roommates from Denver General Hospital came down to live with me. We thought it'd be fun to check out Dallas, and we could be roommates again. And what was I going to say about that? Something.
I don't know. You went down to Dallas to go for the airline, but you really had a hard time in Dallas because of where they were.
I would say my roommates came down there and they said, "Have you ever seen Parkland Hospital and how they treat their black people?" It was pretty bad because at that time they were just cement floors.
Right.
And they'd have a curtain between the men and the women, and they would all be in the same ward. It was more like a dog kennel. It was pretty bad. And then, it was just a lot of things. And so they decided they couldn't stand it down there anymore, and they decided to come to California and talked me into coming with them. And
So did you ever actually fly as a airline hostess?
oh yeah.
How many
About
years?
a year and a half.
Which airlines?
Down at Braniff.
Braniff.
It's no longer in business, I don't believe. But
So
there
then-
there was a lot of problems there because we had a roommate. There were three girls in each. There were three girls in each suite, and Louise and I had become fairly good friends, and our roommate wouldn't do any of the work she was supposed to. We were supposed to do, you know, cook and clean up after ourselves and all that, and Ellen wouldn't clean up. She'd just leave the dishes. And we got called in about it because the people in the other room objected, which I don't blame them. We should have done the dishes. I mean, Louise and I should have if Ellen wasn't, but after all this hullabaloo, we came out here to California. And,
So do you remember what year it was when you came out to California?
oh, don't remember. I must have been,
Was the war still going on?
oh, no. What? I'm trying to remember when the war ended.
Where were you when
That's
BE
what I was
Day
trying to remember
or
where
Victory?
I was when I heard about it. I can't remember. Isn't that funny? It's not funny. It's strange.
Do you remember where you were when FDR died? Was that a big deal?
I was a Republican when FDR died, but I wasn't as bad as one of the gals in nurse. I was in nurses training at that time.
Oh, is that right? So nurses
I remember
training must
Marion
have.
Perry
Right.
she was a rabid Republican, and she just cheered and hooray, and I thought, oh God, what bad taste. And she was older than I was. She should have had more sense than to do that. It was horrible. And there were so many people who liked the FDR. But you know, I was born and raised a Republican, so I was still a Republican.
Yeah, it would seem like, I thought you went into nurses training, you know, in 42 or whatever when the war was going. Now they were anxious to have nurses because,
Yeah, and in 43, and it was in there a year and a half.
so you must have gone to Dallas right after the war or something like that. I'm guessing, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think so. I remember this one boyfriend of mine calling, I'd gone with him quite a bit when I was in Denver, and we kept in touch when he was overseas. And he asked me about television, and I just sort of laughed because I'd never heard of it in Dallas, but it was big on the coast already. And he told me, and I was so shocked I could hardly believe that they really had television. And I was in Dallas at that time. It's kind of interesting in how
Your mind connects the years, the pieces
Yeah.
together. Do you remember when you met Dad? What year?
about 1948, I think it
Yeah,
was.
that's what I was thinking. So how long had you been in California when?
I'd been quite a while because I'd had a couple of romances in California before I ever met your dad.
So you probably had been in California a couple years before you met Dad.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
So yeah,
Probably
you,
three.
huh?
Probably 3 years.